All right, so buckle up, listeners. Today's deep dive, well, it's a wild one. We're diving headfirst into this whole Ruben Gallego situation.
Yeah.
The Arizona congressman,
Right.
the 2016 divorce from Phoenix mayor, Kate Gallego, and of course all those divorce records that were just unsealed. Everyone's been going crazy about it.
Yeah, it's been
It
everywhere.
feels like every time you turn around, there's a new headline. Sealed records, Senate race, accusations flying left and right. You kind of get the feeling people are expecting some big, dramatic reveal,
No, absolutely. It's like everyone's waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. So, expert speaker, you're the one who really dug into these documents. What's the actual story? What'd you find?
Honestly, for all the hype, it's pretty tame.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking the usual divorce stuff, property division, custody agreements, child support, the things most couples work through.
So no big bombshells, no
Yeah.
smoking gun.
No, not really.
Wow. But wait, how did this whole thing blow up then? This was because of Gallego's opponent, Kari Lake, right? She went after him hard, didn't she?
100%.
Like she really implied those records were hiding something huge, something bad.
She really did. Lake and, well, her whole campaign, they basically painted Gallego as this figure who was potentially unfit for office. They even went so far as to call him a deadbeat dad in their ads. Can you believe that?
Wow, I do remember that.
And, a lot of this all stemmed from, the timing of everything. Gallego filed for divorce right before his son was born, and then on top of that, asked for those records to be sealed.
Okay, so yeah, I can see why Lake would jump on that. Politically, that's definitely something you can use against your opponent,
Yeah.
especially with that whole family values image
Yeah.
that so many politicians go for.
Right, exactly.
But okay, when those records actually were unsealed, did her claims hold any water?
That's where it gets, well, interesting. The documents actually directly contradict pretty much all of Lake's big accusations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They show a totally normal, standard divorce process. There's literally no sign of anything unusual, let alone anything that would make him unfit for office or a bad parent.
Wow.
And importantly, there are multiple very clear statements in the documents about the fact that there was no domestic violence, which is huge.
Yeah, especially after that whole deadbeat dad thing.
Mm.
So it sounds like Lake's campaign was really stretching the truth, to put it
Yeah.
mildly.
You did say that.
But if the divorce was so normal, why seal the records in the first place? And why fight so hard to keep them that way?
No, that's a great question. I mean, think about it. At the time, Ruben Gallego, he was a brand new congressman, and Kate Gallego was on the Phoenix City Council. They both had their reasons for wanting some privacy.
I mean, yeah, anyone would, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the middle of a divorce.
Exactly. It's a tough, messy process, even without the whole world watching. Plus, they had a newborn to think about. It makes sense that they'd want to shield their child from any public scrutiny.
Okay, that makes sense. So how did this even get out? Wasn't it the Washington Free Beacon who sued to get those records unsealed?
Bingo. You got it. They're a pretty conservative news organization. And their whole argument was that, the public has a right to know this kind of stuff about elected officials.
Especially if it impacts their job, right?
Exactly. Their point was that these documents, they could give real insight into, both a congressman and the mayor of a major U.S. city. They basically said it was a matter of public interest.
So it's like this classic clash, right? Personal privacy versus the public's right to know. And all of this is playing out while Gallego's running for Senate.
Right. It's like they say timing is everything.
It really is. So in the end, the Free Beacon won, right? Those records are unsealed.
Yeah, but not without a serious fight. The Gallegos challenged them at every turn.
Really?
Oh, yeah. First, they tried to block the release entirely. Then, when it was clear that wasn't going to work, they pushed for, super heavy redaction.
To protect their son, I'm guessing.
Exactly. They wanted to make sure his privacy and safety were protected.
Makes sense. So did the judge end up redacting everything?
No, not at all. It wasn't a total blackout. The Yavapai County Superior Court Judge, John Napper, he agreed to redact some info, things like financial details and anything directly about their son.
So a compromise.
Basically, he protected the child but still allowed for transparency.
Interesting. Sounds like he tried to find a good middle ground. But the majority of those documents, those are public now.
Yep, public record.
Wild. What was the reaction like when those records actually came out? Were people surprised, by what was, or I guess I should say wasn't in there?
Let me tell you, I think there were some disappointed reporters out there.
Well, I said all that for nothing.
Pretty much. There's this one article, and it actually quotes the judge, John Napper, the one who oversaw the whole thing. He said something back in June about how everyone would be rather deflated when they saw what was actually in those files.
Well, he wasn't wrong.
Yeah, deflated's a good word for it. All that buildup, all that speculation, and for what?
I know, right? It's kind of comical in a way. But, even if the records themselves were a bit of a letdown,
Yeah.
you got to admit the whole thing, the whole spectacle of it all is pretty fascinating. Like, when was the last time a garden variety divorce became national news?
Yeah.
I feel like we're kind of bumping up against something bigger here, something about, I don't know.
About the way we view public figures.
Yeah, exactly. Like, where do we draw the line? When does someone's personal life become, well, public?
Right, it's that constant tension, isn't it? Public interest versus personal privacy, especially when it comes to politicians. We've been wrestling with this forever, but it feels different now, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, transparency is important. Voters should know who they're electing. We want to know if there's something going on in their personal lives that might affect their judgment, their ability to do the job.
Absolutely, we have a right to that information. But at the same time, everyone deserves some level of privacy. Politicians, too. And divorce. Come on, that's about as personal as it gets. Raw emotions, family drama. It's not pretty. Would you want all that aired out for everyone to see?
Not a chance. And it's not just about them either. They have a kid,
Yeah.
a child who's going to grow up with this all over the internet.
That's the part I think gets lost sometimes. We get so caught up in the political drama, the gossip of it all, that we forget there are real people involved, real lives being impacted.
It's easy to get swept up in the moment, though, especially these days. One accusation, a whiff of scandal, and boom, it's everywhere. Social media is like wildfire.
Oh, tell me about it. And once that fire starts, it's almost impossible to put out, even if it turns out to be totally unfounded.
Exactly. And that's what's so scary, right? Like with Lake's campaign. They basically admitted they had no idea what was in those files. They just kept hinting that it was bad, and people ate it up.
It's the power of suggestion, right? Plant that seed of doubt, and it just grows. And the worst part is, even when those accusations are debunked, the damage is done. That perception, it lingers.
It's a good reminder, I guess, to be careful what you believe, especially during an election.
100%. It's on us as voters to be informed, to do our research, not just buy into whatever we see online.
Easier said than done sometimes, though.
Oh, so it takes effort. You got to be willing to dig a little deeper, look for actual evidence, not just take someone's word for it.
Be critical thinkers.
Exactly. Ask questions. Who benefits from this information getting out? What are they not telling me?
That's great advice for, well, pretty much every aspect of life, honestly.
Truth. But okay, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, we should probably circle back to the Gallegos.
Right, right. Okay, so we've talked about the politicians, but what about the media? They played a pretty big role in this whole thing, too, didn't they?
Huge. I mean, they're the ones who bring these stories to light. Right?
Which, I mean, that's their job. To a certain extent, at least.
For sure. And in this case, you could argue that the Washington Free Beacon, for all their political leanings, they were trying to hold those in power accountable. They wanted transparency.
Okay, yeah. And they didn't just make this up. They filed a lawsuit. A judge agreed with them. They reported on what they found.
Right. But it's how they reported on it, isn't it? All that speculation before the records were unsealed, the what's he hiding narrative. It's like they were trying to create a scandal even when there wasn't one.
So what? They shouldn't have reported on it at all. I mean, it was a big deal. Sealed legal documents about elected officials? That's news.
I'm not saying that. But there's a difference between reporting on something and sensationalizing it, and that line,
That's right.
it gets blurry, especially these days when everyone's fighting for clicks, for attention.
It's a tough spot to be in, but for us, for people reading these stories, watching these news segments, it's on us to be aware of that, to remember that there's always more to the story than what we see on the surface.
Yes. 100 times yes. Don't just take everything at face value. Ask yourself, who's pushing this narrative and why?
Okay, that is some seriously good advice.
And on that note, maybe we should start to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
This whole thing, it really makes you think,
Oh, for sure.
We started with these sealed divorce records,
Yeah.
rumors of scandal,
Uh-huh.
and what did it amount to? A pretty normal divorce.
Yeah. A garden variety divorce, as the judge said.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, this kind of stuff, It happens all the time in politics. Like, as soon as things get heated, personal matters become political weapons.
Oh, it's like clockwork, isn't it? Election season rolls around and suddenly everyone's a saint or a sinner, no in between.
And with social media, forget about it. It just explodes.
Right, one little spark and the whole forest is on fire.
It makes you wonder, where do we go from here? Are we just doomed to repeat this cycle forever?
Well, I don't know about doomed, but it's something we have to be aware of, right? As voters, as citizens. Like, we can't just let these kinds of distractions dictate our choices. There's so much more at stake.
Totally. But it's easy to get caught up. These stories, they're designed to be addictive, to get that emotional reaction.
Oh, 100%. It's all about grabbing your attention, holding it for as long as possible. And the juicier the story, the better.
Even if it's not even true.
Exactly. We need to be smarter than that. We have
Yeah.
to remember, behind those headlines, those are real people
Hmm?
with real lives. And those lives, they're a lot more complicated and, frankly, a lot more interesting than some of these narratives make them seem.
Beautifully said. Expert speaker, any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up this deep dive?
Just this. Don't mistake entertainment for information. Think critically. Ask questions. And most importantly, don't be so quick to judge. You never know the whole story.
That is some seriously wise advice. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. In a world where information is constantly vying for our attention, it's more important than ever to be discerning, to think critically, and to remember that behind every headline, there are real people with real lives. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, stay curious.